Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Morning, Jimmy. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm just waiting for this storm to come in. How are you looking over there? It's
Very,
on its way.
very overcast. I mean, you had to turn the lights on in the house to see your way around. So
I was
looks like,
walking around the office. Felt like I was in a horror movie. It's so dark in here.
well, we need the rain. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, I think what the weatherman said is this is now going to start our rainy season, whatever's coming.
You're gonna call it the rainy season? Is it the hurricane season or just the rainy season?
We'll just call it rainy season now.
Yeah, right.
Which
Yeah,
brings up a good point. You know, we should start talking to our past clients about what their hurricane plans are. And a good
Hurricane
place
prep.
a good place to find that is the Hillsborough County site. And they have a whole pamphlet and everything. And you can make a nice little letter in your Moxie.
Yeah, Moxie. That's right. Yes, you can.
Okay. And
I think that's all we're talking about Moxie though today. We're not.
No, we're not. That's all we're going to talk about.
Well, you got to also think with this season starting to hit too, and then obviously we will have the hurricane season and things like that coming. Today we're going to discuss, a little bit about insurance and stuff like insurance, as we're going through. And when this stuff starts hitting, and you're going to hear us start communicating a little bit more about it, but binding insurance when there are storms and stuff like that coming in, so you can make sure you can stay on point.
Yeah,
but we're
I mean, the interesting part about being a sales manager is I call myself the funnel of issues. Okay, that they all come to you, right? And you're dealing with them. And sometimes, it's the Sunday night at 4:00, and someone calls you and says, "Well, listen, I put in 2 contracts, and I got one accepted, and we want to wait till Tuesday to see if we get the other one." And that's great. But I said, well, okay, it's fine to wait. What about your contingencies? And they go, well, we have a 3-day rescission period, right? And I'm like, in California, maybe, but not here. So I said, well, what do you have for inspection contingencies? Oh, we waived those, 0. And I said, what about your financing contingency? Oh yeah, we waived those too. I said, well, congratulations, you have a contract.
Right.
So, okay. And that's the consequence. Well, some of the consequences, we have to be very careful when we're writing contracts, waiving contingencies, and what that's going to cause the buyer. And we got to be careful, entering 2 contracts, because we're committing a buyer to 2 houses at the same time. And are they financially approved for that?
Right.
Because you're misleading a listing agent. And we don't want to mislead people. I mean, this is hard for listing agents right now because they're getting multiple offers and trying to do it. And then they meet with a seller, and then, a day later we're canceling a contract. Yeah, that's not cool.
Well, I mean, let's talk what the contract says. So, I know with the lack of inventory, there are a lot of people that are writing multiple offers on multiple houses, hoping that they are going to be able to get one of them, and then just kind of shooting for the stars on each one. But when you have, so what actually happens per the contract if there is so if we're using an as-is contract, right, and there's no inspection, or no inspection period, and
0
right to cancel, it's not there, it's 0. What's the responsibility of the buyer in that standpoint? Like, so
they better be getting their escrow in,
right?
All right, because they have an executed contract. And by the way, if they don't get escrow in, they still owe it.
Right?
They still owe it. You entered a contract with 0 inspection days, and I'm waiving appraisal contingency.
Yep.
Basically, you're saying, I love this house, I want it, and there's no reason why I would never want this house. That's and I am putting up $20,000 of money, or 10,000, or whatever the amount of money is in escrow. That's due, whether you collect escrow at time of contract or it's due in 3 days.
Yep.
that escrow
Still do.
is still
Right.
due.
And think of it on the standpoint as, you know, and this even happens during an inspection period where, let's say they get the inspection, you know, day 2 of the contract, they don't have to have it into 3, and then they find some things on the inspection report. They're not sure what they're going to do. And I'm just not going to deliver the escrow right now. And then I'm going to make a decision. Well, you can't do that. You have a responsibility in the contract to ensure that escrow gets deposited in a timely manner, because the seller, if the buyer goes in breach, the seller is allowed to have that. That's part of it. It's not just deposits, it's all deposits and those that are supposed to be there. So if it's not there, they still have that right. So if you are writing multiple contracts and you get both of them accepted and they both have 0, you can be responsible having to pay that escrow to that seller if the seller wants to go that way after all that stuff. So,
And I kind of wanted to talk about this, Jimmy, because, you know, we talk about how to be aggressive and make the ideal offer, right? But we don't always talk about the consequences of what we're doing. And we really have to have a conversation with our buyer when we're doing that, and what the consequences are.
Yes.
Because they read the contract as is with right to inspect and cancel. Except
they don't even know what that means.
They don't know what that means, you know, and they're reading it that, you know, right. This is our job. We do this every day. People, you know, maybe buy one house every 5 years or something. And our contracts do change about once every 3 years. So, you know, that's our job to explain the contract on what we're committing them to.
Right.
And that's really important.
Yeah. And, you know, it's, you know, we have superior knowledge over the public with all this stuff. Just because they read online and they see that houses are flying off the chain, it's our responsibility to advise them and let them make the right decision. I like what Lauren said, that she goes, you know, there's too many moving parts already with one contract, let alone 2. It's just, you know, you're going to have to put your foot down in that case and really discuss, you know, and it's not being a fear monger. You're not trying to go in there and say, oh my God, this is everything that's going to go wrong. No, it's your job is to advise and let them know what some of those things could be if this does happen. That's our job, is to advise and then let them make the decision what they want to do.
And so, some of that advice should be in an email.
Yes.
Okay.
Something written. Right. Yes.
Yes. Because, you know, amnesia works well sometimes with buyers. And so, you know, you really, sometimes, you know, if you're advocating one thing and they're advocating another, sometimes in writing, it might weigh on them a little bit differently than if you're just verbally explaining it.
Yeah, and we want to cover our butts too, and make sure that we are disclosing and, again, giving advice so they can make the right decision. And I actually wrote this down. We're giving advice. We're not deciding for them. Advise, not decide. We're advising to give them what the best options are, put it in writing, so it just has something to, you know, protect us in the long run that we've had this conversation. So now, but let's go here. Let's go here, Joe. I mean, we're talking about contracts and these inspection periods that are gone, right? Like, I mean, I see them like, oh, no inspection contingency. They're paying whatever price for the property. It doesn't matter. Let's talk about, when writing an offer, what kind of offer to write. And again, it's going to be different for every buyer, right? Like, everybody's a little different. Everyone's a different situation. But again, our job is to advise and try to get our offers accepted, and put our buyers in the best position, and honestly get the seller in the best position where they want to accept our offer. So, you know, let's discuss that a little bit, around everything around from inspection periods, addendums, like what should we use when writing an offer? Like what?
Well, you know, it's funny. Everybody runs to the as is contract, and that's good. I mean, sometimes it works. But how strong of an offer are you making? And are there multiple offers? You know, there are times when my buyer is like, I have to have this house. And how can we tell the seller I actually really want it?
Right.
And I'll write it on the regular general FAR contract, because there is no out in that.
There's
all right.
Not. Right.
There is no out unless, for some reason, the foundation is falling in or something. Really, it really exceeds the predetermined numbers for your inspection. I can't think of the word, but your limits, your repair limits.
Yeah.
So, but when we present that offer, and you can put, you can make it, but it's a very strong offer for the seller and the buyer.
Yep.
Right? It's a bilateral contract. It doesn't allow someone to get wishy-washy on day 2 and, oh, I found something else I really like and I want out and blah blah blah. But oftentimes when we send that offer, we're going to have a conversation with the listing agent to explain we're entering this contract because we have a very strong offer. We're not backing out. I call it the back door. And I was talking to one of the other agents the other day. He goes, the as-is contract is just an option to buy, right? For whatever the inspection period. I have an option to buy this house. Whereas the general FAR contract says, I am buying this house and I'm not ready to walk away. The other thing on the seller side, it's a very contained contract in the sense of these are the only warranted items we're fixing.
Yep.
All right. And those warranted items, I just had a listing, and I like telling a little stories. I asked for only general FAR contracts. I said no as-is contracts. And there was a reason why. The house was 16 years old. It had a 16-year-old hot water heater. It had a 16-year-old roof. They had replaced one air conditioning unit, but the other one wasn't. So I really didn't want to be held hostage in an as-is contract, someone coming in and going, I want this replaced, this replaced, this replaced. We have to remember the general FAR contract says, if it's in working order, it's good. It doesn't matter how old it is. And so that's where, as listing agents, we have to, what is the condition of the house that we're doing? And we can ask for only one kind of contract. We can do that, and you're protecting the seller. So the repair addendum came in. Well, the roof is old. Yep, you knew that. That was in the disclosure. And well, there's cracks in the driveway. Yeah, well, they're not covered in the inspection. Cracks aren't covered. Sorry. We have to operate in the contract. Is there anything else that needs to be fixed? Yeah, the air conditioner needs some Freon. Okay, we'll do that. All right. So otherwise, if I had accepted as-is offer, they would be wanting the hot water heater replaced, the cracks in the driveway fixed. And so that we're protecting our seller. And by the way, it made a strong offer for the buyer because they weren't backing out of the contract. There's no back out for them.
So John put in here, other agents don't even know really the regular contract, right? There's so many new agents that are coming in the business. They don't know 95% of offers probably coming in are as is. Even these agents that are throwing on there and sellers just wanting it as is. And I get it if that's what they want. So if other agents don't know the difference between the two main contracts that we use with the as is and then the residential, you better believe that your seller or buyer aren't going to understand what it is either. So explaining that difference, and upfront now, when you're in a market like it is and you are trying to be more competitive, I think it's super important that they understand the two, because an as-is contract, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's an as-is, right to cancel basically. Like they don't have the ability of, well, in the contract, it doesn't say anything about getting repairs. Now we know probably 70-80% of those coming in, they're asking for repairs on an as-is, and then guess what they get the ability to do? Cancel if they don't get it answered, right? So and I think on my take on the as-is versus residential, I think as-is, to me, it can protect the buyer a little bit more just because they can cancel for any reason. But that's the only reason that I like that contract, is if something does happen and this happens, and boom, then they're right to cancel. Here you go. And they're out, and we're going again. Whereas in this market, when we are trying to write the best offer, we're doing these appraisal gap coverages that we're trying to explain to a buyer that this is what it is. We're trying to decrease inspection periods. Like there's a lot of post occupancy stuff that people are asking for so they can go buy another house. if we can't kind of set them up and let them know that this is the situation, and it's not so you can just go out there and they probably think they're going to ask for repairs anyways, regardless with whichever contract you go with. Understanding the value of the residential contract on the buyer standpoint, I think is, and then with John's thing is like you have to like losing offers because of it, because the agents don't. Well, we have so many tools, not just an as is contract, which has been around, compared to Ribbon or Divvy or all these other programs that are going to come in and other addendums and stuff. Yes, we're going to have some explanation, let them know that this is, like you said, this is how much they want the house. And they're willing to, if there are some issues and stuff like that that need to be taken care of, continue forward based on what the repair, what the repair limits and everything are. So, I think it's important on the buyer standpoint that they understand that. And then again, on the listing side, why wouldn't you? As long as you're willing to do some repairs if something happens, a lot of buyers are starting to settle right now. There's not enough on the market. So they're going out there saying, you know what, I did want this, and this, but I'm okay now. I wanted a 5-year-old home. That's not my range. I can't find anything. I'm going to go back 12, 14, 15, 16 years and find something that they like, and kind of go from that. And that there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're settling, the first inclination of an issue, they start asking questions. If they completely love the house, it's one story. If it's like, yeah, I need a house, this is great, it has pretty much all the bells and whistles minus a few things I need to do, and then they start getting a little nervous when like, oh, what, the roof is 15 years old, I may Chris, that was amazing.
Was that Chris?
That was Chris's butt.
Well,
so
it's okay.
Yeah. Oh,
there he is.
I got a new webcam, so it's like really picking up some other things. I feel like there's a ghost in the machine right now. Chris, anything you want to add to that? I'm just kidding. Spot on. Thank you. What he said. So yeah, and again, and when we look at protecting this, whoa, I'm all over the place. So I'm going to my notes and not even finishing my sentence because of Chris's butt. So
yeah,
you're welcome. Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. So again, it's just important that they understand. And again, we are talking about protecting our sellers with these things, and sellers don't want to sit there and have it go on and off the market, on and off the market, on and off the market. So, again, I'm not telling you that you have to use the residential contract, but if you want to put your offer up against other ones and actually have it stick out a little bit more, it's a very, very good option.
Let's face it, the other options and contingencies in the contract are going to have a bearing on whether your offer is,
right,
is accepted. But if you have a very strong offer and you have 2 other as-is contracts sitting next to yours, if you've done your due diligence and had a conversation or write a nice little email to the listing agent explaining why you use that contract and not the as-is, my buyers really love it, we're not canceling it, we put in reasonable repair limits, to cover any warranted items. And, if the seller feels good about his house, he's already knows his air conditioner's working and, and there's nothing leaking. That's really what you're covering, right? The mechanicals of the house. And it's important. When we have buyers, Jimmy, we were talking last night about some due diligence before we even show the property.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing because I know you've ran into some things. I've definitely ran into some issues and stuff like that. And again, the last thing we want to do is put a buyer in a situation that they can't do or didn't know. I hate it when I hear, I wish I had known that. I wish I had known that I probably wouldn't have got the house, or I would have done this instead, or I would have offered this instead. So doing some of that due diligence up front, like, in this market with, again, all these different real estate agents that are out there, I think with our knowledge of a brokerage, just in general, the training that we do for you, we put you on this pedestal, as an agent to be able to really give an extraordinary experience, but also have the knowledge backing you when it comes to contracts and all the stuff that could possibly happen to help advise, the buyers. And that's what makes us different than the brokerages that charge 1%, 1.5%, 2%, stuff like that. So I think it's very important to do that due diligence. And, it's not just, hey, here's the offer. I want to put this offer in. Well, let's take time. Let's look at the let's look at the property. Let's kind of see what's going on. You know, we have a lot of, in our area, we got a lot of homes that are 13, 14 years old, 15 years old, 16. You know, I'll just use a roof as an example. And, you know, the last thing I think, well, again, our job isn't to decide for them, but advise, like, you know, it's phenomenal that there might be 2 or 3 years left on the life of the roof. But I know many people in my neighborhood that they have that, but their insurance company is saying, we're dropping you, or you need to replace the roof. Like, that's what you need to do. And that's a real thing that's out there. So, you know, having those conversations up front, it's not to scare them, but since they're starting to settle with what's out there, you know, they might at right now, because they just want to buy a house, like, oh, that's fine, I can afford a $10,000 roof. Okay, that's
Well, yeah,
great. But
I've had 2 clients last year, both bought homes that had 3 to 5 years roof life left. Both had Citizens, because when you get into that age, the only insurance company you're going to get to insure you is Citizens. And within 2 months, Citizens was sending them a letter saying, we're dropping you unless you replace your roof. Even though we had a 3 to 5 year roof life left on, you know, on our 4-point, they didn't care. And no one came to the house. So, you know, the insurance companies, what they do is, you know, they bind you, they take your money, and then they send the paperwork up to Citizens, and somebody's sitting at a desk looking at the paperwork going, no, Jimmy's roof's 15 years old. No, we're gonna send him this letter and you're gonna replace. So that's where our expertise comes in with our buyers, is, you know, knowing 15-year-old roofs are going to be really hard getting insurance. Any water heater over 15 years old is not going to get insured. I just went through that with another couple. They had to replace it before they even moved in. We couldn't get an insurance company because they were 15 years old and they just would not insure.
right.
So, and now they're talking about tile roofs. When we all think tile roofs are, you know, 40, 50-year life. Well, now I went to an insurance seminar, and the insurance companies are questioning anything over 30 years on a tile roof. And you have a lot of them over in your Powell Beach area.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, what we don't want to do is put an offer in on a home, get escrow in, spend $500 on an inspection, and find out that we're going to have problems getting insurance. And meanwhile, the buyer has paid $500 for an appraisal. So now they're out $1,000 and don't have a house.
Right.
And we don't want to do that.
So I would say,
go
ahead. Sorry. No, you
No,
go.
I mean, I explained to them, I sit down and, you know, when we were at that point, and I'm like, listen, I will spend your money any way you want me to, but I'm going to tell you what the ramifications are. And, you know, at this point, a 16-year-old roof is not going to fly. It's just not going to do it. And the problem is we have a lot of junk coming on the market, you know, and a lot of them have old roofs, original everything, and they're 16, 17, 20 years old. And sometimes you just have to have that conversation with your buyer going, I have no problem showing it. I know, but here's what our issues are going to be. And saving yourself some time and saving them some time and money.
Right. You got to think, obviously they don't have access to property disclosures and stuff like that to see kind of what's going on. So when I kind of discuss due diligence, and, you know, maybe you look on the outside, everything looks good, but, you know, spending that time even during the inspection period to spend a little extra time digging into some of those things, looking up permits, you know, for buyers. So some of the things that I do is, you know, obviously look at the property disclosure to see if it has everything filled in. So if there's actually something marked yes, that there was an issue, like, do they actually have it filled in on the bottom? You know, so on the bottom of that section on the property disclosure, they're supposed to explain, you know, what that issue is going to be. So as an agent, you know, you should be reaching out saying, hey, this wasn't filled out. Give me some more information on it. Because again, the last thing you want to do is be like, oh, you signed it. I saw it too. I didn't ask any questions. And then there is actually an issue from something that was done prior. So spending time digging through that and asking a lot of questions, looking up permits, I think is a big thing too, to see if anything's open. Because if we are using an as-is contract, one of the things that it states in there is to actually get the permits closed out. Okay. Like the seller has to do that now. And if there's anything that was done without a permit that shouldn't have been, that needs to be taken care of it too. So talk about really protecting the buyer also on that standpoint. But if you go into it knowing kind of what, already looking that up and seeing what's going on, again, you can advise your buyer and give them more peace of mind of what could be, what could be happening. And then to kind of even take it a step further, like think of how many investors are out there now, swooping up property. And they're basically, there's someone renting it. So there's a lot that are getting flipped and put out there. You always get I've never occupied the property.
Mm-hmm.
I've never occupied the property, so I don't know what's going on. Well, you went in and did a major renovation. You should know what's happening. You've been paying the utility bills. You've been doing this. You've been doing that. You definitely know. So there's a lot of questioning that can happen on there. And I kind of wanted to turn this into another point where, as an agent, if you have that investor that you're finding houses and selling and getting them under contract and purchasing them, and then they're turning around and, let's say, putting them back on the market 6, 8 months, a year later, you make sure, you are part of that transaction too. You know what was there before, what's there later, and it's your duty to disclose anything that can materially affect the home. So, and the example I'm going to use is, knowing as a buying agent, we literally had a buyer agent that, not from us, it's a totally different brokerage, had an investor, and they bought an auction home that had a sinkhole. Okay. They rehabbed it. They actually did remediate the sinkhole, okay, which we found out. We didn't even know anything about that. He didn't disclose anything, didn't say anything about anything. New buyer buys the house. In this case, it's our client that bought the house. And from some other issues from the, I guess you could say, upgrade of the home from the investor, we ended up digging up and finding out that there was a prior sinkhole. The buyer never even knew about it, and they've been living in the house for 3 or 4 months. And all of a sudden there's a sinkhole and there's nothing about it. And the other agent's just like, I forgot. It's not a good thing. So when all else fails, obviously disclose. And yes, Lauren says, go to velocityhall.com. For Hillsborough County, you can go to hillsgovhub.com or .org or whatever it is. And you can actually pull up old permits and the new ones in the systems. And then, also on the buyer standpoint, like some of the things that obviously permits and things, like go back and look at the prior listings that have popped up. Because the nice thing about MLS, if it was an agent that put a whole bunch of attachments on there, they're still there. So if I go back last year, I can look at the seller's property disclosure from when they sold the house and see if there was anything that was on there and see if anything kind of might. And again, it's not to scare a buyer, not to get them to buy it. It's just do the due diligence, make sure you're comfortable, let them know what's going on, and let them make a decision.
There is a feeding frenzy right now for buying houses, and there's a lot of investors, and we've run into this in Tampa, a lot of Miami investors who have come over and bought houses in the city of Tampa, and they're fixing them up. They're not pulling permits. I had a client, we went to look at a property. The offers were due that night. We were there in the afternoon, and there is a huge stop work order from the city pasted to the window of the house. And I came back and looked up permits, and they had no permits, and they redid the whole house and the roof and the air conditioner, and no permits. And Jimmy, it's not necessarily the buyer's going to have a problem. The buyer will have problems because he's going to have trouble getting insurance.
Right.
All right. That's the real issue when it comes down to, and then we're going to have an appraisal problem because the appraiser is going to come in going, wow, this is all redone, and I can't see any permits being done on all this rehab. We enclosed a back porch, and it's the square footage on the city site isn't matching the square footage of the property. So it's almost like playing chess, right, Jimmy? You got to think three moves ahead of what you're doing, and you got to think, all right, well, we want to put an offer in. Well, what can happen? What are the things? And that's with experience after a number of years. What obstacles am I going to have to close this property? Have permits been pulled because it's a rehab? Has You know, am I going to have issues with insurance? Am I going to have issues with the inspector coming in going, this isn't well? And it's really good to have a variety of inspectors. Some, you know, some you can have for just doing a townhouse, and someone you should have if the house has been rehabbed. This inspector is really good looking at rehab houses because he's done construction and he understands it's not necessarily the way it looks good, it's the way it's supposed to be done. Okay,
Right.
so and your inspector should be also pulling permits. You should have an inspector that's pulling permits in his report.
Yep.
So
Yeah, that's definitely a big thing. And, you know, some title companies will pull some of that stuff too, to make sure that there's nothing open, lien searches, things like that. And sometimes that will, but that's usually towards the end. That's usually towards the end of the transaction. Then you're like, holy crap, what are we gonna do? You know, so,
we had a
you know, and
new agent here put an offer in on a house, and 2 weeks before closing, when they did the work on permits, they found there were a lot of stop work orders. There was a court date set up for the person with the county or the city for, you know, because he had done all this stuff. And the buyer wanted a house. So we got the buyer in the office, and I sat down and explained to him, not only did they fix the entire house, but the house sits in a flood zone, which you're not allowed. You're only allowed to do 50% improvement on a house sitting in a flood zone. So I said to the buyer, here, once you buy this house, you're now responsible to close all these open permits. This guy is in Miami. He can disappear and we'll never find him to finish off all this stuff. And, you know, and now you're going to have you're going to buy an unmarketable house because they fixed 100% in a, you know, I have no idea if the city's going to say, come back and put the plaster wall back. I mean, the city can be very strict on what they do. So they ended up not buying the house, and we ended up getting it back. And the seller did have a problem with what they wanted to have a problem with giving the money back. And we pointed to the contract where it says the seller knows of no government agency letter out on them and whatever. And we kind of circled that and sent it back and said, I think you have to give the escrow back. Otherwise, the attorneys will be calling you, taking you to court since you committed fraud by signing this document.
Right.
So, and this is where knowing the contract, when you and good at the contract, you can really move through a lot of these issues pretty quickly.
Right. Now, Mike Clayman asked, you know, what's an example of how a residential contract would cancel? So, you know, you have some normal stuff like loan approval period and stuff like that. That would be, you know, an option. And then in the contract, when you come to the repair limits, and you can't just cancel because you don't like what you found out, because there's an obligation based on that residential contract saying that this has to be taken care of. And it's broken down into 3 different sections. Now, if the repairs, so if there are repairs that are needed and they exceed the amount of what is in the contract, so let's say it's $3,000 worth of repairs and there's 10 grand that needs to be done based on estimates that have been taken care of. There's a few options that can happen. The seller can decide, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and take care of it, right, per the contract. Like the seller say, you know what, I'm just going to do it anyways. It's fine. Let's keep moving forward. So the buyer still cannot cancel and just get out because they didn't like that there's $10,000 repairs that are going to happen. The buyer can accept it as is up to that $3,000 and pick items that can get taken care of. But if they can't come to a decision together, so like, let me see, that it says either party. So if the contract specifically states, so that I'm going to just read it for you. Seller may elect to pay the excess by delivering written notice to the buyer. Buyer may deliver written notice to the seller designating which repairs and agreeing to accept the balance of the repair items as is and subject to the seller continuing the maintenance. If neither party delivers such written notice to the other, then either party may terminate this contract and buyer shall be refunded the deposit. So if we get repairs that are 10 grand and we only have $3,000, we get estimates, or the seller gets estimates to see what it's going to cost to get taken care of, and it's over that $3,000 mark, and the buyer doesn't say, hey, just do this and I'm fine, Within 5 days, the seller has a right to cancel if we don't deliver something at that point. We need to deliver. Do we want the repairs? What are we going to do? And that would be a way that you could get out of a as is contract.
That's
Seller
the
or
wonderful
buyer.
thing. That's the wonderful thing about the regular contract, FAR contract. It is a bilateral contract giving
Yep.
both parties abilities to get out. It's no different when you get to the appraisal part of that contract, where, you know, if you're not be able to get financing, the seller can cancel.
Yep.
Because not to hold him up on it.
Yep. I think it's good. So there's some examples there. Now let's swing over towards listings. So as a buyer, obviously we want to do some due diligence in this market. We want to advise, let them know all of these things that, again, not to scare them and be fear mongers, but just let them know. Because again, the last thing you want them to do 6 months after is like, I wish I had known that this was going to happen, or I was going to need to do this. Let's talk on the listing standpoint. A lot of that can be very very similar. You need to do now, to me, on a seller side, you have even more time. Most of the time, you have more time to actually do that diligence as an agent. So you can ask the right questions to the seller and really challenge them, let's say, on that property disclosure based on what you found on permits or pulled up on prior listings and things like that. But we have something really cool here with Century 21 that we can offer and turn our listings into what we call pre-loved, certified homes, pre-loved certified homes.
Yep.
And there's some things that need to happen for that to happen, for us to say that it's a pre-loved certified. But, if you do all these things, you really put your seller in the best position. There's no questions that need to be asked because you have everything pretty much answered, right?
Yeah. I mean, and even if the house was sold 2 or 3 years ago, if they bought it, like your sellers bought it 2 or 3 years ago and had an inspection. I had one in Temple Terrace a few years ago where the sellers came in, they bought the house, and then that 2 years later, they're putting on the market, and I had the buyers, and we did the inspection, and the electric panel was one that had been recalled, and and so they had to replace that panel, and which normally is about $1,500 to replace a panel. But there was also other issues about how it was put to the house. I mean, they end up spending $4,000 fixing that. And which, if you're a seller and you've already negotiated your price and you're thinking this is the amount of profit I'm making, now it's $4,000 less because, now they have to fix it because even if they put it back on the market, they would have to disclose it.
Yep. So,
or fix it and then put it back on the market. And at the time, the market wasn't as crazy. And, do you want your house on the market for another 30 days or whatever? So, that's why the pre-loved is really good. And if I automatically do it if the house is over 30 years, I mean, it's, you got an age, especially, with, when you go back into the early 70s, we had aluminum wiring and things like
Yep.
that, which can be issues.
Oh yeah. And, I know not everybody wants to go through all of that stuff when they're getting ready to list, but, I've had many times going through that process, and, maybe things weren't quite ready to be replaced or they needed to be, but at least the seller now knows. And we know that another inspector is going to come in and they're probably going to say something different. They're going to find other things, but the main stuff is going to be brought to their attention. So then they can be prepared if it does happen, we're already having that conversation up front. That roof, it's going to be really close. Like it's going to be tough. We probably even want to get a roofer out here. Let's see what they say. That they're saying the same thing. So it's really going to come down to this other inspector and the buyer and how they feel and how much they really want the house. And just this may be coming back. Just be prepared. Be prepared that these things could happen.
Yeah. And it's good to have people that, because, in a listing, they're going to go, do you know a roofer that can come out? And so it's good to have
Yes.
people in your, what I call resource list, That's what I call it. And I do. My resource list has plumbers, electricians, and all that I can call and get out there. And the particular house I just sold that was 16 years old, we did have a roofer go out and get on the roof and make sure weren't going to have any issues.
That's
I don't
perfect.
want issues after, I got a contract. I want to know
Right.
I talked to my sellers. I said, listen, you've got a 16-year-old water heater. We may have an issue with. I just want to preempt you to know you may have an issue. We might have to do something. So if they can't get insurance. So, and they were fine with that. They were, should we replace it now? I'm like, no. No, let's see if we have an issue. And then, but I want you to know that this could be an issue that we're going to be dealing with.
Yeah. And then obviously, that just gives them such, when it comes up 3 weeks later, a week later, a week and a half later, whatever that might be. Cause let's say it's a roof thing, like that might not be an issue right off the bat. It might not be an issue because when do they have to get their insurance binded and get that all set up? Like, I mean, you would hope that the buyer is going to be all over it and try it right away, which side note, make sure you have, we talk about knowing people, know an inspector, know a roofer. I mean, know all these things, but have an insurance person that is your go-to person, guy or gal. And when you're listing a property, have them go and write a quote to see what it looks like, what it could, and they're going to tell you, hey, you know what, this could be a possible issue. You're going to need to have this looked at to get taken care of, have the right things done. So that way, when, it is happening, that's not 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks down the line, where all of a sudden now they can't get a loan because they can't get insurance. Because this needs to be taken care of.
Insurance is a huge issue right now. I had Avatar and they got liquidated, and I had to get another insurance company, and I had to get a 4-point, to get the new insurance. And luckily, I know a few good inspectors, and I said, come out and give me a quick 4-point, but that they're big issues. And I don't want a phone call from one of my buyers saying, we moved into the house and they canceled my insurance and I had to spend $12,000 to put a new roof on. We don't want to do that. I've had people said, I want this house, and I'm like, I'm okay. Are you okay with putting a new roof on in a year or less than a year? And then went, yeah. I'm like, okay, as long as you're okay with that, I don't know what your finances are. I don't know how much you have in the bank. So, as long as you're okay with putting a new roof on, if we do get insurance.
And look, the reason we're talking about this, by the way, all this stuff today, it's not because we said that because we think you're not doing it, or this isn't happening or that isn't happening. We have agents that are tenured, that have been around, that have seen a ton of stuff, and this is almost second nature to them. And they're not gonna, they're thinking of all these things all the time. So it's not to call everybody. It's not about calling anyone out. It's just bringing it to our attention, especially for some of the agents that may or may not. This is one of those days of the week for our trainings that, for me as an agent, I get these stories and this knowledge that makes me feel that I've been in the business even longer because of it. Because as talking about this, you may never even think about it until it happens to you and you find out that there was a sinkhole, or the roof did need to be replaced in a year, or that instead of having public utilities, they have water and septic and we're not disclosed, and all those things. You just don't know. So again, this isn't about bashing everybody saying, hey, you're not doing this stuff. It's just bringing it to your attention to say, these are some things that we really need to be looking at. And if we're going to be protecting the sellers and protecting our buyers for one of the biggest financial decisions of their lives, we want to make sure that we're doing all trying to think of all these little things that we can advise and make sure that they're taken care of and give them peace of mind.
And knowing your buyer and not necessarily their whole finance industry ability, but sometimes we know that they're really tight and they'll pick a house that has well and septic, and it's a VA deal. And guess what? We need to get a well test, and that's $150. And in order to get a septic test, that's $450 because they have to drain the septic system. And, we've got to explain to them that that's a little more added cost. So you got 150 for that, 450 for the other thing, and now you have your regular $400 for your regular inspection. So you're talking about a lot of money to some of the people that don't have it to spend. So
spending the time up front to recognize those things and have those questions again, we can't feel bad if they decide they don't want to later and they've spent the money, because we've already given them all the information. That's our job. Give them the information and let them make the decision. So
So Jimmy, so I'm going to make a plug for Moxie, even though we didn't want to talk about it today.
no, that's
So
fine.
a couple weeks ago, I had buyers and they weren't really ready to buy now. They're going to buy, they're ready to start in August. And I said, okay, great. Well, they're in town. They live here. I said, I want you to come in the office and let's meet and let's go over the market and let's figure out what you want. And of course, I printed out the buyer presentation and walked through that with them, and then could talk about insurance and could talk about a lot of things. And they were a young couple, their first time buying a house, and they had a million questions. And it was just nice to sit and have that rapport and not be, not just meeting them to show them a house, but actually have a really good rapport with them to do that. And I encourage people to actually do that and use that presentation with them and go through it with them. And it made them feel very, they left. I was like, are you okay? Are you very comfortable? They go, yes. I say, great. There's no stupid question. Email me. If I didn't cover it, email. And so that's the plug I wanted to do for Moxie. Is that
well, and of course I'll add to that. So, when you make these presentations and Moxie present, you're sending them, if you're sitting down with them, printing it up, or you actually send them the link, that website is live until you delete it. So that presentation is available for them at any time. And the way that we've made the buyer presentation is it literally walks you through all the steps that you're going to need to know when purchasing a house. So at any time, they can go back into that presentation if it's 2 weeks later and say, what step are we in with purchasing the house? Or what are some things that I need to think about for this here? What do I need to think of? And they can always go back and look at something. And of course it looks good. It's sexy, it's professional. And they're able to go back and take a look at it. So definitely use it. Send it to everybody.
Jimmy, we pay for it, so you might as well use it, right?
Yeah, right. It's there. Yeah, it's there. Might as well use it.
Yep. But I guess my point was sitting down with them. You can talk a lot to people about the type of homes we're going to look at, because you're going to see some things and you might like them, but if they're 16 years old and they have all the original equipment in them, we're going to have an issue. And you look so much more knowledgeable to them than just what I call the door opener, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. You want to add that wealth to them. But I also looked at it this way. It was skin in the game. I got them to come in for an hour and a half and sit and meet. They now have skin in the game. And now, I got, here's my lender, give him a call. They got they're ready to go start looking at the end of July, and they're already looking. I got them on sorts and they're looking at things, and I like this. And my comment to them is, go and look at the area now. Pick your area that you want to be in, and then it'll be easier when we start in August. So, no. That was a plug. You did a great job putting that together. Thank you.
Throw that in there. All right. Well, I don't have much more. Do you got anything else you want to add for today, or anybody have any questions online, as we'll probably close out a little bit earlier today?
Yeah. All I'm going to say is we have a contract class in South Tampa scheduled for June 2nd from 10 to 12. So if any new people want to attend that, we have some people coming up from Sarasota to do that. Kat and I are going to be running that class, and it's not a beginner's class. We're comparing and contrasting the two contracts, and when to use them and what to use them and what are the pitfalls of one and the pitfalls of the other. It will be 2 hours. We're going to have lunch. If you're coming, please let me know so that we can have lunch for you. Otherwise, you're going to sit in the corner, and we have candy and water bottles you can have. Anybody's welcome. It's not just for our office. I'm doing it because we've hired a lot of people, and somebody ask, can we send out an invite? Yeah, I guess we can. I'll ask Ange to send out an invite. So, but I wanted to mention that just because in case, we brushed a lot of things today on the 2 contracts, but
Yeah.
it will, and the in-person basically is there so you can ask questions. And we do it, we ask you to print both contracts and bring a highlighter. So,
No, that's
so you
smart.
can highlight the contracts, yeah.
The in-person stuff works, just works phenomenally. And then, because when you are doing a class like this, and if you were doing it online, it's very tough for the people that are watching online to actually hear the questions, know what's going on, and that you just kind of get lost.
I
when you're in
did
there.
one
It just
during the
doesn't.
pandemic, and it was very
Just tough.
challenging because you're trying to look at 2 different contracts and keep everybody in the same spot.
Yep.
Was very challenging.
It
So
was very tough.
yeah. And it's a complicated thing. So
I think we had one other question in here. It says, does anyone know, this is from Regina Man,
okay.
does anyone know someone or a company who can secure an empty home, change locks, board up windows, the owner passed away?
Ooh. I don't.
I don't. Regina, I would go.
Handyman could handle the boarding the windows. Do you really want to board the windows? That seems kind of extreme, but
Well, you gotta watch out with boarding too, depending on where the property is located and if it's in an HOA and all that kind of stuff too.
yeah, and it might even draw more attention to it with board up windows.
Regina, I would throw that question on the Beggins Agents page on Facebook. I think that's a great resource to have a lot of other. Check with Brandon at Survey Eagle also, but throw that up on the Beggins Agents page and see if we have some support from our huge following of agents and leadership and everybody that's on there for you.
The keys would be just a locksmith.
Yeah. So, all right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you got a lot out of our bantering back and forth on this fantastic Friday.
Yes, I hear some lightning, thunder and lightning here. So
it's gotta I'm surprised I made it this long. I thought power was going to go out. So yeah. We made it. We're good.
That happened one time when I was doing this with Craig. I lost internet. I'm like, I never lose internet.
Right. And it's only going to happen when you actually need it the most for anything. Hands down.
Jimmy, it's been a pleasure. If anybody has any questions, email us and we'll get you the answers.
Yep. You all have a good weekend and enjoy the rest of your Friday. Be safe.
Be safe. Bye, Jimmy.
See ya.